Hello guys, my name is James. Today I was going to talk about my presentation on growing up between words. I was going to talk about like how it's grown up, and sort of like relationship between my family and Vietnam under French colony. So growing up, I always heard political stories from my grandparents about their life in Vietnam under French colonial rule. Their stories were filled with like struggles, hopes, and complicated feelings about France. I also learned French from them at home. And this made me wonder, how does colonial past shape identity even after generations? Well, my grandparents lived through the French colonization of Vietnam, a time when the French controlled much of everyday life, schools, businesses, even people's thoughts. They told me stories about how people were forced to adopt French customs and language. One story I remember is my grandparents saying the French control anything, everything, even how people thought about themselves. Hearing these stories made me realize how personal and emotional history can be. And these are the pictures of my grandma, just because I couldn't find like any pictures of my grandpa. Um, Historian Christopher Gosser explains how deep the French influence went in Vietnam. He writes, in Vietnam, a new history. The French not only built roads and railways, they reshaped how people moved, worked, and even saw themselves. As one Vietnamese civil servant noted in 1930s, it's An Nam, but it's not An Nam. One doesn't quite feel enemies in the highlands. If you don't know, An Nam is Saigon back in 1980s through 1960, I believe. The French shaped the Vietnamese education system, economy, even the way people thought about identity. My grandparents' experiences fit into the bigger historical picture of colonial rule, leaving lasting marks. Well, this idea connects directly to Albert Memmi, who said colonization forces the colonized into the position where their identity is defined by the colonizer. My grandparents' stories reflected this. Even their successes in education or language came from a system meant to control them. Memmi, he once said, the colonized never change, never characterized in an individual manner. He is entitled only to drown in an anonymous collectivity. My family didn't just live under colonial rule, they carried the mindset it imposed even after moving away. So migration, moving to France after independence. Well, after Vietnam gained independence, my grandparents eventually moved to France. Even though they spoke French and adapted to French culture, they were still seen as an outsiders. Louis-Jacques Doré, in his article Vietnamese Communities in Canada, France and Denmark, explains, in France, the symbolic burden of the colonial past still complicated relations between Vietnamese immigrants and the whole society. My family's experience show how colonial history doesn't just disappear, it keeps affecting people even after they move. Today, many older Vietnamese immigrants in France still have complicated feelings. A newspaper article I found said his presence as an Asian accomplice to George Floyd's murder pushes me to reflect on anti-black racism within Asian communities. My own internalized racism and all these racist remarks and actions, which I witnessed when I was younger within my own community, whether in my family or in public spaces in Vietnam. So Vietnam today, Even though Vietnam is independent, you can still see sign of French colonialism today, from architecture in cities like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, in French-style villas, opera houses, and cathedrals, to use of the Latin alphabet, well, which was introduced by the French. Colonial influence is still everywhere. French dishes like banh mi and café Suda, which is Vietnamese coffee, is now considered uniquely Vietnamese. They come from that mix of colonizer and colonized culture. Well, more importantly, I think colonialism left a deeper impact. It shaped how people think about modernity, language, and success. Well, for example, maybe speaking French or English is often seen as more educated or prestigious, which shows how colonial ideas about value and intelligence still linger. Well, visiting Vietnam now, I can see how the past shaped the present, and it helps me better understand my grandparents' experience and my own identity too. Reflection on how it shaped me. Um, you know, Learning French and hearing my grandparents' story made me realize that history isn't just in the books, it's inside family. I grew up with a layer of identity, Vietnamese in heritage, French in language and culture, and deeply aware of colonial history. And it made me think critically about power, memory, and belonging from a young age. Personally, I think colonialism affected and when independence came, they live on today in languages, in family memories, and in cultural tensions. That's all I have for my presentation, and thank you so much for listening.